Listen to the rhythm of the early industrial printing press, stamping out pages by the thousands. That is the mechanical reality of a marketplace scaling for a mass audience. Between 1660 and 1780, English literature underwent a structural migration. For centuries, writers relied on the aristocratic court for patronage and survival. By the 18th century, that power had transferred to the consumer market. We can map this literary ecosystem starting from a single central premise, an 18th century bourgeois restructuring. Following the turbulent English Civil War and the Restoration, society sought calm. London urbanized rapidly. Political stability allowed a new middle class to accumulate disposable wealth, and with wealth came the leisure time to read. This new audience had little interest in the risky, probing philosophies of the Renaissance. They wanted order, reason, and facts. To meet this demand, the literary infrastructure split into two primary avenues of consumption to serve the new society: the public forum and the private sphere. This structural rewiring flipped the entire power dynamic of publishing. Writers were no longer beholden to royal tastes. Their survival now depended entirely on the collective wallet of the buying public. If we follow the public forum branch, we see it rapidly generating two symbiotic forces: coffeehouse culture and professional journalism. London's coffeehouses became decentralized hubs for political debate and commercial exchange. In this etching of coffeehouse politicians, these spaces are highly communal and intensely text-driven. A fast-moving urban environment required fast-moving information. This demand created a new vocation: the professional journalist, producing topical, serialized literature on tight deadlines. The most successful example of this new medium was The Spectator. Looking at this issue from March 1, 1711, the standardized print layout and daily publication schedule reveal it as a rapidly produced commercial commodity designed to reach a mass demographic. The goal of these publications was highly specific. As The Spectator itself declared, it aimed to enliven morality with wit. It sought to instruct a rising middle class on proper manners, taste, and social conduct. Journalism effectively functioned as a cultural regulating mechanism. It provided a standardized behavioral code for a bourgeoisie trying to define its own identity. Across the ecosystem, the private sphere was developing its own distinct branches: diarists and belles letters. The diary emerged as the ultimate tool for empirical observation. It offered an unvarnished, immediate record of daily urban life. Samuel Pepys's private journal stands as the definitive record of the Restoration era. Kept in a shorthand code, it captured the physical and social realities of London with exhaustive detail. When the Great Fire of London broke out in 1666, Pepys recorded the raw trauma as it happened. In this etching, showing the heavy smoke billowing over the Thames, we see the sheer scale of the disaster that Pepys observed and documented in real time. This instinct for observation scaled up from the micro to the macro. History itself became a branch of Bell's letters, best exemplified by Edward Gibbon's massive scholarly decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Whether a writer was producing daily newspapers for a crowded coffeehouse or recording private thoughts by candlelight, the entire literary ecosystem oriented itself around documenting, categorizing, and analyzing empirical reality. Running parallel to all of this was a thriving, independent branch of the ecosystem: drama. Throughout the Restoration and the early 18th century, the stage was the primary venue for biting social and political satire. Playwrights like William Congreve and George Farquhar ruthlessly mocked the hypocrisies of the upper classes. Then came a massive, systemic disruption: the Theatre's Licensing Act of 1737. The act installed the Lord Chamberlain as the ultimate government censor. Every single theatrical script now had to be reviewed and approved, specifically to weed out political dissent. The physical effect on the industry was immediate. Vibrant, chaotic theatrical venues, like the one behind this neoclassical facade, were neutralized. The public stages went quiet. Working playwrights and satirists, most notably Henry Fielding, found themselves abruptly forced out of their profession. But creative energy in a capitalist market doesn't disappear when censored, it reroutes. The political gagging of the stage forcefully funneled the nation's satiric energy into an entirely unregulated medium: prose fiction. The displaced energy from the dying theater flooded into a rapidly expanding supernode, the novel. Free from the classical rules that govern the stage, the novel was highly adaptable and hyper-responsive to what the market actually wanted to buy. Its evolution was heavily accelerated. Phase 1 was social realism. Daniel Defoe mapped the harsh economic realities, criminal underbellies, and survival tactics of the lower classes. Phase 2 formalized the genre through epistolary and moral frameworks. Samuel Richardson used a series of fictional letters to map interior psychological landscapes and enforce rigid moral codes. Phase 3 brought satire and parody. Henry Fielding, exiled from the censored stage, weaponized the novel against itself. He invented a parodic force specifically to mock the stifling morality of Richardson's work. This chaotic explosion of commercial texts required a new regulatory force, literary criticism. Critics like Alexander Pope and Samuel Johnson attempted to impose order on this free market. They worked to establish strict canons of taste and codify the standards of the English language itself. Within a single generation, the novel matured from a low-prestige narrative about criminals into a sophisticated medium absorbing the cultural authority of the stage. Because the novel was born into a commercial market rather than an academic tradition, it matured quickly enough to begin deconstructing its own structural rules almost immediately. The ultimate rebellion against Augustan rationalism came from Laurence Sterne. As you can see in this portrait, Sterne carried an air of wry skepticism, which he poured entirely into his masterwork, Tristram Shandy. The book actively parodies the mechanics of reading. Sterne abandoned linear time and coherent plotting, filling the pages with wild digressions, blank leaves, and pure absurdity. On our map, this metafictional break erupts chaotically. It refuses to follow the straight, logical paths established by the earlier realists and moralists. By breaking the sequence of time to match the associative leaps of the human mind, Sterne's 18th century experimentation directly anticipated the stream of consciousness techniques of the 20th century. Sterne demonstrated that the commercial novel provided a flexible technology for mapping the nonlinear chaos of human cognition. As the novel expanded its structural limits, the literary center of gravity expanded geographically, moving outward from London to the margins of Britain. The 1707 Union of Parliaments acted as a political trigger, permanently injecting Scottish voices and perspectives into the English literary marketplace. Tobias Smollett brought a carnivalesque energy to prose. He weaponized bawdy, physical humor against the polite, highly regulated manners of English society. In stark contrast to Smollett's greedy regionalism, writers like James Macpherson captured the European imagination with the Ossian epics, feeding a growing obsession for primitive and mythic landscapes. This fascination with Scottish myth was grounded in harsh political reality. As we see in the rugged texture of this memorial stone from the Battle of Culloden, the cultural integration of Scotland was built over the severe historical trauma and bloodshed of the Jacobite risings. If we pull back to view the entire ecosystem, by the 1780s, the contrast is stark. The simple, rational root node of the early 18th century has grown into a wildly interconnected, highly volatile network. The introduction of regional voices, emotional interiority, and structural deconstruction irrevocably fractured the rigid rules of the Enlightenment. The commercial machine built to enforce order and reason had inadvertently constructed the launchpad for the Romantic Revolution.